My daughter thought I was asleep when she whispered those words to her husband. But at 3:17 a.m., lying in the hospital bed with tubes snaking from my arms, I heard every single syllable. What she said didn't just break my heart. It rewrote my entire legacy in one cruel sentence. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments what you would do in my situation. The morphine drip was supposed to dull everything, but my mind remained razor-sharp as footsteps approached my room. Through barely open eyelids, I watched Rebecca tiptoe across the polished hospital floor, her designer heels clicking softly against the linoleum. Even at this ungodly hour, she looked immaculate. Hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless, as if she'd stepped from a magazine rather than rushing to see her dying father. Behind her, Marcus shuffled in, looking exhausted and wrinkled. My son-in-law had always been the practical one in their marriage. This accountant counted pennies while Rebecca spent thousands. But tonight, something in his posture suggested he was counting something far more valuable than money. The heart monitor beside my bed beeped steadily, the only sound punctuating the suffocating silence. Rebecca pulled a chair closer, the metal legs scraping against the floor with a harsh grating that made me flinch internally. She reached for my hand, her touch cold and calculated rather than warm and loving. "How much longer do you think he has?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment's mechanical symphony. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, checking his watch with the precision of someone tracking billable hours. "The doctor said weeks, maybe a month if we're lucky." "Lucky?" Rebecca's laugh was bitter, sharp enough to cut glass. "Marcus, we're drowning. The house payment is 3 months behind. Emma's private school tuition is due, and your practice is hemorrhaging money." Through the thin membrane of pretended sleep, I felt my chest tighten, not from the cancer eating away at my lungs, but from the realization that my daughter was treating my deathbed like a business meeting. "Rebecca, don't talk like that," Marcus whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Your father's been generous." "The medical bills." "Generous." She cut him off, her grip on my hand tightening unconsciously. "Do you know what he's worth, Marcus? The construction company alone is valued at $12 million. The rental properties, the investment portfolio, the life insurance policies. We're talking about serious money." The beeping of my heart monitor remained steady, but inside, my pulse was racing. 42 years ago, I'd held this same daughter in the delivery room, tears streaming down my face as I promised to give her everything. Now she was cataloging my assets like inventory in a warehouse. "The will reading can't come soon enough," she continued, her voice taking on the tone she used when planning dinner parties or charity galas. "Emma needs stability, and frankly, so do we. Dad's been talking about changing things, donating more to charity. We can't let that happen." Marcus moved closer to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the darkened glass. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we need to be more involved in his care decisions. Maybe it's time to discuss comfort measures. Quality of life over quantity, you know." The words hung in the air like poison gas, seeping into every corner of the room. My daughter, the little girl who'd once cried when her goldfish died, who'd made me promise never to leave her, was discussing my death like a stock transaction. "Rebecca, that sounds like..." "Like what?" "Like love? Like mercy?" Her voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing toward my still form. "He's suffering, Marcus. Sometimes the kindest thing is letting go." I wanted to sit up, to scream, to demand explanations. Instead, I focused on keeping my breathing steady, on maintaining the illusion of medicated unconsciousness while my world collapsed around me. Through barely parted lashes, I watched Rebecca stand and smooth her dress, the same way she'd done as a teenager when caught in lies about staying out past curfew. Some habits never died, apparently. "The lawyer is coming tomorrow to discuss the estate planning," she said, checking her phone with the efficiency of someone managing a schedule. "We need to make sure everything's in order." As they prepared to leave, Rebecca leaned down and kissed my forehead. Her lips were cold, the gesture mechanical rather than affectionate. "Sleep well, Daddy," she whispered, but the endearment felt like a knife wrapped in silk. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving me alone with the machines and the devastating knowledge that my own daughter was counting down the days until my death brought her financial salvation. The nurse's morning rounds began at 6 a.m. sharp, but I'd been awake since Rebecca and Marcus left. Sleep felt impossible when your mind was processing betrayal at the cellular level. Diane, my favorite nurse, bustled in with her usual cheerful demeanor, adjusting 4 lines and checking vitals with practiced efficiency. "How are we feeling this morning, Mr. Harrison?" she asked, her voice carrying the kind of genuine warmth that made the sterile hospital environment bearable. "Like I've been hit by a truck," I managed, my voice hoarse from the ventilator treatments. "But still breathing." Diane smiled, making notations on her chart. "That's the spirit. Your daughter called this morning, by the way. Said she'd be in around 10 with breakfast from that fancy bakery downtown." The mention of Rebecca sent ice through my veins, but I forced a smile. "She's always been thoughtful." "You raised a good one," Diane continued, unaware of the irony. "Not many children are as devoted as Rebecca. Most adult kids struggle to visit once a week." If only she knew. Rebecca's devotion had price tags attached, and apparently, my death was worth more than my life. After Diane left, I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in each panel. At the same time, my mind replayed the previous night's conversation. 42 years of fatherhood reduced to asset evaluation and timeline speculation. Every sacrifice I'd made, every late night spent building the construction business, every college tuition payment and wedding expense, all of it nothing more than an investment waiting to mature. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd worked 16-hour days for decades, building an empire specifically to secure Rebecca's future. The construction company had grown from a one-person operation into the most respected general contractor in the state. The rental properties provided steady passive income that could support generations. The investment portfolio had weathered multiple market crashes through careful diversification and conservative management. All of it was designed to ensure Rebecca never experienced the poverty I'd known as a child, when my father died at 35 and left my mother with 3 kids and a mountain of debt. I'd sworn my daughter would never face that uncertainty, never have to choose between heating the house or buying groceries. But somewhere along the way, security had transformed into entitlement. The girl who'd once helped me sort nails in the garage had become a woman who saw my life as an obstacle to her lifestyle. My phone buzzed with a text message from my lawyer, David Morrison. "Hospital visit confirmed for 2 p.m. Bringing will documents as requested. Hope you're feeling stronger today." I'd called David yesterday afternoon, before Rebecca's midnight revelation changed everything. The original plan had been to review charitable giving strategies, to ensure more of my wealth supported causes I cared about while still providing generously for my family. Now, those conversations would take a dramatically different direction. Rebecca arrived precisely at 10, as promised, carrying expensive pastries and wearing the kind of silk blouse that cost more than most people's rent. Her smile was perfectly calibrated, bright enough to suggest devotion, but not so cheerful as to seem inappropriate for a hospital visit. "Good morning, Daddy," she said, setting the bakery box on the rolling table with theatrical care. "I brought your favorites from La Petite Maison. The almond croissants you love." The endearment that had once warmed my heart now felt cold and manipulative. I accepted the pastry, noting how she watched my every bite as if calculating the impact on my remaining time. "You look tired, sweetheart," I said, testing her reaction. "Late night." Her composure flickered for just a moment. "Marcus and I were discussing Emma's school situation. You know how stressful these decisions can be. Of course, education is important." I kept my voice neutral, not indicating that I'd overheard their actual conversation. "What kind of decisions?" "Private versus public school, mostly. The tuition at Riverside Academy is substantial, but the opportunities." She trailed off, dabbing at imaginary tears. "I just want what's best for her, you know? And with everything so uncertain right now." The performance was flawless. Voice trembling with just the right amount of maternal concern, eyes slightly misty, but not enough to ruin her makeup. Suppose I hadn't heard her calculating my net worth 12 hours earlier. In that case, I might have been moved by her dedication to her daughter's future. "I understand completely," I said, taking another bite of croissant. "Family always comes first." We made small talk for another hour, Rebecca sharing carefully edited updates about Emma's activities and Marcus's work. She mentioned the financial pressures obliquely, fishing for reassurance about their future security without directly asking for money. I gave her nothing. No promises, no hints about the will's contents. no indication that her nocturnal conversation had been overheard. Instead, I listened to her perform the role of devoted daughter while my heart broke a little more with each false smile. When she finally left, claiming a lunch appointment with the ladies from the country club, I felt exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with cancer. Betrayal was more draining than chemotherapy, more painful than surgery, more isolating than any disease. The afternoon stretched ahead of me, filled with the weight of decisions that would reshape not just my legacy, but my daughter's entire future. She'd made her choice clear in whispered words she thought I'd never hear. Now it was time to make mine. David Morrison arrived at 2 p.m. sharp, carrying a leather briefcase that had witnessed 40 years of legal victories and defeats. His silver hair was perfectly groomed despite the humid afternoon, and his navy suit showed no wrinkles from the drive across town. David had been more than my lawyer. He'd been Martha's friend, Rebecca's honorary uncle, and my confidant through every major decision since the early days of building the business. "You look better than I expected," he said, settling into the visitor's chair with the careful movements of a 70-year-old man who'd learned not to take mobility for granted. "Appearances can be deceiving," I replied, studying his face for any hint that he knew why this meeting had become urgent. "Thanks for coming on short notice." David opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency, withdrawing several manila folders and a yellow legal pad covered in his distinctive handwriting. "When Robert Harrison calls about estate planning, I clear my schedule. How are you feeling about the charitable giving strategies we discussed?" "That's exactly what I need to talk about." I shifted in the hospital bed, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate the 4 lines. "Things have changed, David. Dramatically." His eyebrows rose slightly, the only outward sign of surprise from a man who'd spent decades hearing unexpected revelations. "Changed how?" I took a deep breath, tasting the recycled hospital air and the bitter residue of betrayal. "Rebecca visited me last night. Late. She thought I was sleeping." Understanding flickered in David's eyes. He'd seen enough family drama over the years to recognize the tone in my voice, the careful way I was choosing my words. "What did you hear?" he asked. The question opened floodgates I hadn't realized were holding back. I told David everything. Rebecca's asset calculations, her timeline speculation, her discussion of comfort measures and quality of life decisions. The words came out in a torrent, 42 years of paternal love colliding with 12 hours of devastating clarity. David listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, but never breaking eye contact. When I finished, the silence stretched between us like a chasm, broken only by the steady beeping of medical equipment and the distant sounds of hospital activity. "I'm sorry, Robert," he said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of destroyed illusions. No father should have to hear those words from his child. "The worst part is how calculated it all was," I continued, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "She wasn't emotional or desperate. She was businesslike. Like I'm already dead, and she's just managing the transition." David closed his legal pad and leaned forward, his expression shifting from professional to personal. "What do you want to do?" "I want to change everything." The words came out with more force than I'd intended, surprising both of us. "The will, the trust structures, the business succession plan. All of it. That's a significant decision, Robert. One that will have lasting consequences for your family." "My family made their decision when they started counting my money while I'm still breathing." David nodded slowly, understanding the finality in my tone. "Tell me what you're thinking." I outlined my new vision, a complete restructuring that would provide modestly for Rebecca and Emma while directing the majority of my wealth toward charitable causes. The construction company would be sold, with proceeds funding a foundation focused on providing housing for low-income families. The rental properties would become part of a trust supporting homeless shelters and transitional housing programs. "What about Rebecca's immediate needs?" David asked. "The house payments, Emma's school tuition? She'll receive enough to maintain a comfortable lifestyle, but not enough to live lavishly without contributing something of value to society." I'd been thinking about specific numbers since dawn, calculating what constituted actual need versus manufactured dependence. And Marcus's business struggles? Not my problem to solve. If he can't manage his own accounting practice, perhaps he should consider a different career. David made detailed notes as I spoke, occasionally asking clarifying questions or pointing out potential legal challenges. His professional demeanor couldn't quite mask the personal sadness I knew he felt. He'd watched Rebecca grow up, attended her wedding, and celebrated Emma's birth. This conversation was destroying his image of her as much as mine. There's something else, I continued, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. I want video documentation of this process. Multiple witnesses. Psychological evaluation if necessary. When Rebecca contests this will, and she will, I want ironclad proof that I was of sound mind and acting without coercion. You're thinking several steps ahead. I'm thinking like a father who raised a daughter capable of discussing his death like a business opportunity. The bitterness in my voice surprised me. She's going to claim I was medicated, confused, and manipulated by someone. I want every precaution taken. David spent the next hour outlining the legal requirements for what we were proposing. Multiple witnesses, video testimony, medical evaluation of my mental competency, and detailed documentation of my reasoning for the changes. It would be a complex process, but one that would withstand any legal challenge. This will take several days to prepare properly, he warned. Are you certain you want to proceed? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. As David packed his briefcase, he paused and looked directly at me. Rebecca is going to be devastated when she learns about this. Rebecca was devastated the moment she started viewing my death as a financial opportunity, I replied. I'm just acknowledging reality. After he left, I stared out the hospital window at the city I'd helped build, literally and figuratively. 40 years of construction projects stretched across the skyline, each building representing months of planning, weeks of labor, and years of pride and craftsmanship. All of it had been for her. Every late night, every missed dinner, every weekend spent on job sites instead of at soccer games or school plays. I'd built an empire to secure her future, and she'd repaid that sacrifice by treating me like a business asset waiting for liquidation. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital room, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear Rebecca's laughter echoing down the hallway. She was probably charming the nurses, playing the role of devoted daughter, while internally calculating how much longer she'd have to maintain the performance. But the performance was about to change dramatically. The script had been rewritten, and she had no idea what role awaited her in the final act. The next morning brought Dr. Patricia Henley, the court-appointed psychiatrist David had arranged to evaluate my mental competency. She appeared in my doorway at 9 a.m. sharp, carrying a tablet and wearing the kind of neutral expression that revealed nothing about her thoughts or intentions. Mr. Harrison, I'm Dr. Henley. I understand you've requested a psychological evaluation regarding recent estate planning decisions. I have. I gestured to the visitor's chair, noting how she positioned herself to observe my facial expressions and body language. I assume you've been briefed on why this is necessary? I've received some background information, but I'd prefer to hear your perspective directly. She activated a recording app on her tablet. Is it all right if I record our conversation for documentation purposes? Absolutely. Documentation is exactly why you're here. Dr. Henley spent the next 2 hours conducting the most thorough mental evaluation I'd ever experienced. Cognitive tests, memory assessments, logical reasoning problems, and detailed questions about my decision-making process. She explored my relationship with Rebecca, my understanding of financial matters, and my comprehension of how the proposed changes would affect my family. Can you explain, in your own words, why you're making these changes? She asked near the end of our session. I chose my words carefully, knowing they would become part of the legal record. I've discovered that my daughter views my death as a financial opportunity rather than a personal loss. She's discussed my assets, my timeline, and even suggested accelerating my demise through comfort measures that would benefit her inheritance timeline. These are serious accusations. How did you come by this information? I overheard a conversation between Rebecca and her husband. They thought I was unconscious due to medication, but I was vigilant and mentally present. Dr. Henley made detailed notes, asking follow-up questions about the specific words used, the context of the conversation, and my emotional response to what I'd heard. Her questions were designed to test both my memory accuracy and my emotional stability. Do you believe your daughter loves you? She asked suddenly. The question hit like a physical blow. I considered it for several moments, trying to separate 42 years of history from 12 hours of devastating revelation. I believe she loves the idea of me, I said finally. The provider, the safety net, the inheritance. but I no longer believe she loves me as a person independent of my financial value to her life. That must be incredibly painful to acknowledge. Pain doesn't make it less true. After Dr. Henley left, I had an hour before Rebecca's scheduled visit. I used the time to call Emma's school, ostensibly to check on my granddaughter's progress, but actually to gather information about the tuition situation Rebecca had mentioned. "Mr. Harrison, how wonderful to hear from you," said Mrs. Patterson, the headmaster's assistant. "We've all been praying for your recovery. Thank you for your kindness. I was calling to check on Emma's enrollment status for next year." "Oh, yes, we're so grateful for your generosity. The full scholarship you established for Emma ensures her education through graduation, regardless of her parents' financial circumstances." Full scholarship. The word stopped me cold. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "The Emma Harrison Memorial Scholarship Fund you created last year. It covers tuition, books, and activities through her senior year. Emma will never have to worry about educational expenses." I thanked Mrs. Patterson and ended the call, my mind reeling with this new information. I'd never created a scholarship fund, named after Emma, but funded by me without my knowledge. Someone had been using my name to guarantee Emma's education while simultaneously claiming financial hardship. The pieces clicked together with mechanical precision. Rebecca had somehow accessed my accounts or forged my signature to create this scholarship, then used Emma's educational needs as justification for requesting additional money from me. She was double-dipping, securing Emma's future while still playing the struggling parent card. When Rebecca arrived 20 minutes later, I was ready. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, settling into the familiar chair with practiced ease. "You look much more alert today." "I feel clearer than I have in weeks," I replied truthfully. "In fact, I just had an interesting conversation with Emma's school." Her composure flickered so briefly I might have missed it if I hadn't been observing. "Oh, how is she doing?" "Beautifully, according to Mrs. Patterson. She's so grateful for the scholarship fund." Rebecca's face went white beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Scholarship fund. The Emma Harrison Memorial Scholarship. Full tuition through graduation. Ring any bells?" The silence stretched between us like a tightening noose. Rebecca's hands twisted in her lap, the wedding ring catching fluorescent light as it spun around her finger. The same nervous gesture I'd noticed during yesterday's performance. "Daddy, I can explain." "Can you?" I kept my voice level, curious rather than accusatory. "Because I'm very interested to hear how a scholarship fund got created in my name without my knowledge or consent." Her carefully constructed facade crumbled in real time. The devoted daughter mask slipped away, revealing something calculating and desperate underneath. The bills were piling up. Emma needed stability. "You were sick, and I didn't want to burden you with financial stress. So you forged my signature." "I signed your name," she corrected, as if the distinction mattered. "On documents that benefited your granddaughter. Documents you would have approved anyway." Would I have? Or would I have insisted on proper legal procedures, transparency, and accountability? Rebecca stood abruptly, pacing to the window with agitated energy. "You're making this sound criminal. I protected Emma's future when you couldn't handle the details." "I couldn't handle the details because no one told me details existed." My voice remained steady, but something cold was crystallizing in my chest. "What else have you protected me from, Rebecca?" "Nothing. Just Emma's education and some household expenses that Marcus." "Stop." The word came out sharper than intended. "Don't compound forgery with lies. I know about the midnight conversations, the asset calculations, the timeline speculation. I know about the comfort measures discussion." Rebecca froze by the window, her reflection in the glass showing a woman who'd just realized her secret had been exposed. When she turned back toward me, the mask was gone entirely, replaced by something more complex and more honest than anything I'd seen from her in years. "You were listening." "I was conscious. There's a difference." "Then you know how desperate we are. How much pressure I'm under. Marcus's practice is failing, the house payments are impossible, and Emma deserves better than uncertainty. Emma deserves grandparents who model integrity and honesty. Emma deserves financial security." Rebecca's voice rose. Then she caught herself and glanced toward the door. "You built an empire, Daddy. Why shouldn't it benefit your family?" "It was always intended to benefit my family. But benefiting and enabling are different things." I reached for the water cup on my bedside table, buying time to process the magnitude of what had been revealed. Not just the overheard conversation, but systematic financial manipulation, document forgery, and emotional manipulation spanning years rather than days. How long has this been going on? I asked finally. Rebecca returned to her chair, her movements mechanical rather than graceful. Since the cancer diagnosis. Maybe before. I don't remember exactly. You don't remember when you started forging my signature? I remember thinking about Emma's future and realizing that traditional inheritance timelines might not serve her needs. The euphemism was perfect. Traditional inheritance timelines. As if there were innovative alternatives to people dying and leaving money to their children. Sit down, Rebecca. We need to have a candid conversation about your future and Emma's future and how dramatically different they're about to become. David Morrison returned the following afternoon with a video crew and enough legal documentation to rewrite my entire legacy. The hospital room transformed into a makeshift courtroom, complete with cameras, witnesses, and the formal atmosphere of proceedings that would outlast my physical presence. Are you ready for this, Robert? David asked, adjusting his tie with the nervous precision of someone about to document something irreversible. I've been ready since I heard my daughter counting my money while planning my funeral. The lead videographer, Maria Santos, positioned her equipment to capture both my face and the stack of legal documents on the rolling table. Two independent witnesses, David's law partner, Janet Wheeler, and Dr. Henley, flanked my bed like sentinels guarding the truth. For the record, David began once recording commenced. This is the video testament of Robert James Harrison, recorded on October 15, 2024, at Riverside Memorial Hospital. Mr. Harrison has been evaluated and found to be of sound mind and free from coercion or undue influence. I looked directly into the camera lens, seeing my own reflection in the glass. A dying man with clear eyes and a more explicit purpose. My name is Robert Harrison. I am 71 years old, and I am changing my will due to recently discovered information about my daughter's true feelings regarding my death and her inheritance. The words felt heavy but necessary, each syllable carved from stone and delivered with the precision of a construction foreman giving critical safety instructions. 3 nights ago, while in this hospital bed, I overheard a conversation between my daughter Rebecca Harrison Matthews and her husband Marcus Matthews. They believed I was unconscious due to medication, but I was vigilant and mentally present. I recounted the conversation in detail, noting how the camera captured every word, every pause, every moment of pain that crossed my face. This testimony would be my voice from beyond the grave, speaking truth that Rebecca would undoubtedly try to discredit. I want to be clear about my mental state. I continued, meeting the camera's unblinking gaze. I understand the implications of what I'm about to do. I understand that Rebecca will contest these changes. I understand that my decisions will cause family conflict and emotional distress. David shuffled through the legal documents, each one representing another facet of Rebecca's diminished future. Mr. Harrison, please state your primary motivations for these changes. My daughter has demonstrated that she views my death as a business opportunity rather than a personal loss. She has discussed my assets with the detachment of an accountant rather than the emotion of a daughter. She has suggested accelerating my death through medical decisions designed to benefit her inheritance timeline rather than my quality of life. The room was quiet except for the software of camera equipment and the steady beeping of my heart monitor. Everyone present understood they were witnessing the destruction of a family relationship, the legal equivalent of watching a building implode in a careful, controlled demolition. Furthermore, I continued, I have discovered that Rebecca has been forging my signature on financial documents for over a year, creating obligations and commitments in my name without my knowledge or consent. Dr. Henley leaned forward slightly. Can you provide specific examples of this behavior? The Emma Harrison Memorial Scholarship Fund at Riverside Academy. I never authorized this fund, never agreed to its terms, and never signed the documents establishing it. Yet it exists in my name, guaranteeing my granddaughter's education. At the same time, my daughter simultaneously claims financial hardship to justify requesting additional money from me. The camera captured every detail, my steady voice, clear eyes, and the methodical way I presented evidence. This wasn't the rambling of a medicated patient or the revenge fantasy of a bitter father. This was testimony from a man who discovered uncomfortable truths about his family and had chosen to act on them. Let the record show, David interjected, that Mr. Harrison has provided documentation of all claims made in this testimony. Bank records, forged documents, and school financial records are included in the case file. I spent the next hour detailing my new estate plan. The construction company would be sold, with proceeds funding the Harrison Foundation for affordable housing. Rental properties would transfer to a trust supporting homeless shelters and transitional housing programs. Investment accounts would establish scholarships for students pursuing construction trades and engineering degrees. What provisions are you making for Rebecca and Emma? Dr. Henley asked. Rebecca will receive a trust fund providing $50,000 annually for life. Enough to live comfortably but not luxuriously, and structured to prevent her from accessing principal amounts. Emma will receive educational funding through college graduation, plus a trust fund activating on her 25th birthday, providing $25,000 annually for life. The amounts represented careful calculation, enough to ensure neither Rebecca nor Emma faced poverty, but insufficient to maintain the lifestyle Rebecca had grown accustomed to without contributing something of value to society. Why these specific amounts? David asked. Because they reflect genuine need rather than manufactured want. Rebecca can live well on $50,000 annually if she makes responsible choices. Emma will have educational opportunities and financial security without the burden of unearned wealth that might corrupt her character. I paused, gathering energy for the most challenging part of this testimony. I want my granddaughter to understand that wealth must be earned through contribution, not inherited through expectation. I want her to know that her grandfather loved her enough to teach her self-reliance rather than enable her dependency. The camera continued recording as I signed document after document, each signature witnessed and notarized with legal precision. My new will, trust documents, power of attorney assignments, and medical directives, all designed to ensure my wishes survived any legal challenge Rebecca might mount. Is there anything else you'd like to say for the record? David asked as we neared the end of the proceedings. I looked directly into the camera one final time, speaking to Rebecca across time and space, addressing the daughter I'd raised rather than the woman she'd become. Rebecca, if you're watching this, then I'm gone and you're learning about changes that probably seem cruel and punitive. They're not. They're the last lesson I can teach you about the difference between love and enabling, between providing for someone and providing them everything. My voice remained steady despite the emotion building in my chest. I loved you enough to work 16-hour days building a business that could support generations. I loved you enough to sacrifice my own comfort for your security. And I love you enough now to ensure that my death teaches you something my life apparently couldn't. That money earned through contribution has value. In contrast, money received through manipulation is worthless. The recording ended with legal formalities, timestamps, witness signatures, and David's certification that all proceedings had been conducted according to legal requirements. As the video crew packed their equipment, I felt simultaneously exhausted and liberated. Tomorrow, Rebecca would visit again, expecting to continue her performance as the devoted daughter managing her father's final days. She had no idea that her midnight whispers had rewritten not just my will, but the entire trajectory of her family's future. The truth was now documented, witnessed, and legally unassailable. All that remained was waiting for her to discover how dramatically the script had changed. Rebecca's footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor at precisely 2 p.m., the same time she'd arrived for every visit since my admission 3 weeks ago. Through my partially closed door, I could hear her chatting with the nurses, her voice bright with the artificial cheerfulness she'd perfected over the years. "Good afternoon, Daddy," she announced, sweeping into the room with arms full of flowers and magazines. "I brought you some reading material and those beautiful lilies from Martha's garden." The mention of my late wife's flowers sent a chill through me. Martha had planted those lilies 20 years ago, nurturing them with the same patience she'd shown Rebecca during those difficult teenage years. The irony of Rebecca bringing flowers from a garden that wouldn't be hers much longer wasn't lost on me. "They're lovely," I said, accepting the bouquet with steady hands. Martha would have appreciated the gesture. "I thought they might brighten your room." Rebecca arranged the flowers in the bedside vase with theatrical care, each stem positioned for maximum visual impact. "How are you feeling today? You look much more alert." I feel clearer than I have in years. Something in my tone made her pause, her hands freezing mid-arrangement. She studied my face with the practiced assessment of someone who'd spent years reading my moods for financial opportunity. That's wonderful news. The doctor says your pain management is finally optimal. Pain management is indeed optimal, I agreed. In fact, I've been managing quite a bit of pain lately. Rebecca settled into the visitor's chair, smoothing her skirt with movements that seemed more nervous than usual. What kind of pain, Daddy? The pain of discovery. Of understanding how naive I've been about the people closest to me. The flowers forgotten, Rebecca leaned forward with exaggerated concern. What do you mean? Has someone said something to upset you? Someone has said quite a few things to upset me. Several someones, actually. I reached for the manila folder David had left on my bedside table. Rebecca's eyes tracked the movement, and I saw the precise moment she recognized the law firm's letterhead. I've made some changes to my estate planning, I said conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than her financial future. Significant changes. The color drained from her face so quickly, I wondered if she might faint. What kind of changes? The kind that reflects new understanding about family loyalty and financial responsibility. I opened the folder, withdrawing a copy of my new will. Would you like to review the details, or shall I summarize the highlights? Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the document. I watched her scan the pages, and I saw her constructed world collapse paragraph by paragraph. Her lips moved silently as she read, calculating the mathematics of her dramatically reduced expectations. 50,000 a year? The words came out as barely more than a whisper. 50,000 annually, paid from a trust you cannot touch, borrow against, or manipulate. Enough to live comfortably, but not luxuriously. She flipped through pages frantically, searching for mistakes or misunderstandings that might restore her anticipated inheritance. What about the business? The properties? The investment accounts? Charitable foundations and educational trusts? Your daughter's generation will benefit from scholarships and housing initiatives rather than unearned wealth. Rebecca stood abruptly, the will falling from her hands to scatter across the hospital floor like leaves in a storm. You can't do this. I'm your daughter, your only child. You're my daughter who discussed my death like a business transaction, I replied calmly. Who calculated my net worth while I lay dying in this bed? Her face cycled through emotions, shock, anger, desperation, and finally, a cold calculation that reminded me uncomfortably of the woman I'd overheard 3 nights ago. Someone's been poisoning your mind against me, she said, her voice taking on the manipulative tone she'd used as a teenager caught in lies. The medication, the stress, maybe one of the nurses has been filling your head with. No one poisoned my mind, Rebecca. You did that all by yourself. I reached for the remote control and turned on the room's television, already cued to the video David had provided. Rebecca's face appeared on screen. Not the hospital room Rebecca, but security footage from the hallway 3 nights ago, timestamp clearly visible. Hospital security cameras are quite sophisticated these days, I said as we watched her and Marcus approaching my room at 3:17 a.m. Audio quality is excellent too. The recording played her whispered conversation in its entirety. Every word about my asset value, every calculation about timeline, every cold discussion of comfort measures and inheritance acceleration. Rebecca watched herself destroy our relationship in real time, her face growing paler with each damning sentence. When the recording ended, silence filled the room like floodwater. Rebecca stared at the blank screen, understanding finally dawning that her midnight performance had been captured, documented, and would survive any legal challenge she might mount. You were supposed to be unconscious, she whispered finally. I was supposed to be a lot of things. A trusting father, a generous provider, an easy mark for financial manipulation. I turned off the television and faced her directly. But apparently, I'm more resilient than you calculated. Rebecca's composure cracked completely. Tears began streaming down her cheeks, real ones this time, not the manufactured grief she'd performed for weeks. Daddy, please. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Marcus's business is failing. The house payments are impossible. Emma deserves stability. Emma deserves grandparents who model integrity, I replied. Something she apparently won't get from her parents. We can fix this. I can change. We can go to counseling, work through these issues as a family. Rebecca, You forged my signature for over a year. You discussed accelerating my death for financial benefit. You treated my deathbed like a business opportunity. My voice remained steady, but the words came from a place of profound sadness. These aren't issues to work through. They're character revelations. She fell back into the chair, her carefully constructed facade finally shattered completely. The designer clothes, perfect makeup, and artificial cheerfulness couldn't disguise the desperate woman beneath. Someone who'd gambled everything on her father's continued gullibility and lost. "What am I supposed to tell Emma?" she asked, her voice breaking. "How do I explain that her grandfather chose strangers over his own family?" "You tell her that her grandfather loved her enough to teach her that character matters more than money. That contribution to society matters more than inheritance from family. That earning respect is more valuable than inheriting wealth." The afternoon sun slanted through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the scattered will documents. Outside, everyday life continued. Traffic moving, people walking, the world functioning while my family imploded in room 314. "I could contest this," Rebecca said quietly, gathering fragments of her shattered expectations. "Claim undue influence, diminished capacity, emotional distress. You could try." I gestured toward the video equipment David had left in the corner. "But you'd be fighting documented evidence, multiple witnesses, and professional psychological evaluation. Plus, any legal challenge would make the security footage a public record." The implications sank in slowly. Not just the loss of anticipated inheritance, but the public exposure of her character, the professional embarrassment for Marcus, the social consequences of being revealed as someone who'd manipulated her dying father. "I never meant for things to go this far," she whispered. "You meant every word of that hallway conversation. The only thing you didn't mean was for me to hear it." Rebecca sat in the chair for another 20 minutes, occasionally asking questions about the trust structure or Emma's educational provisions, but mostly staring at the floor in stunned silence. When she finally stood to leave, her movements were mechanical, automatic. "I love you, Daddy," she said from the doorway, the words carrying more genuine emotion than anything she'd expressed in weeks. "I love you too, sweetheart. That's why I'm doing this." After she left, I closed my eyes and tried to feel something other than profound sadness. The confrontation was over, the truth revealed, the consequences set in motion. But victory felt hollow when the battlefield was my own family. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, arguments, and probably more tears. But today had brought something more valuable. The knowledge that my final act as a father might be the first honest lesson I'd taught my daughter in years. 6 months later, I sat in the sunroom of Riverside Hospice, morning light filtering through tall windows as I reviewed the latest reports from the Harrison Foundation. The construction business had sold for $14.2 million, exceeding even David's optimistic projections. The first affordable housing complex is breaking ground next month, 36 units for families transitioning out of homelessness. Dr. Martinez had given me 3 months. That was 4 months ago. Sometimes spite is the best medicine, and the desire to see my new legacy take root had apparently extended my timeline beyond medical expectations. I wasn't getting better. The cancer was still winning its slow war, but I was lasting long enough to watch my real children grow. That's what I'd started calling the foundation projects, my real children. They reflected my values, carried forward my principles, and would outlast me by generations. Unlike my biological daughter, they would never calculate my worth in dollars or whisper about inheritance timelines. Mr. Harrison? Jenny Martinez, the foundation's executive director, appeared in the doorway with her usual morning energy. "The scholarship recipients are here for their quarterly meeting." I turned from the window, where I'd been watching the grounds crew maintain Martha's Memorial Garden. "Send them in. I've been looking forward to this all week." 8 young people filed into the sunroom, ranging in age from 17 to 23, all recipients of Harrison Foundation educational grants. Unlike Rebecca's fraudulent scholarship fund, these were earned through merit, maintained through performance, and designed to create contributors rather than consumers. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison." They chorused with the enthusiasm of young people genuinely grateful for the opportunity rather than entitled to it. "Good morning, future builders of America." I gestured to chairs arranged in a semicircle. "Tell me about your progress." For the next hour, I listened to updates that filled me with more pride than any father had a right to feel. Maria was excelling in her engineering program, already accepted for a summer internship with the State Highway Department. James had completed his electrician certification and was working with Habitat for Humanity. Sarah's architectural designs were being considered for the second Harrison Foundation housing complex. These young people understood something Rebecca never had. That education was a tool for contribution, not consumption. That knowledge earned through effort had value beyond its price tag. That gratitude was appropriate when receiving help from others. Mr. Harrison, Maria said during a break in our discussion, I wanted you to know that my family talks about you every Sunday at dinner. We pray for your health and express gratitude for the opportunity you've given me. I'm not giving you anything, Maria. I'm investing in your potential and expecting a return through your contributions to society. She nodded seriously. That's why the prayers include promises to honor that investment. After the students left, I sat alone in the sunroom feeling something I hadn't experienced in months: unqualified peace. These young people would carry forward my legacy in ways Rebecca never could. They would build communities, solve problems, and create value rather than simply consuming wealth they hadn't earned. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Rebecca's latest legal motion denied. The court found no grounds for challenging your competency or the will's validity. How are you feeling about everything? I typed back, like a man who finally learned the difference between being a father and being an enabler. The truth was, I felt sorry for Rebecca. Not guilty. She'd made her choices and would live with the consequences, but genuinely sad that she'd chosen financial manipulation over an authentic relationship. The daughter I'd raised was still in there somewhere, buried under years of entitlement and poor decisions. Emma visited twice a month now, usually accompanied by her other grandparents rather than her parents. At 14, she was old enough to understand that family relationships had become complicated, but young enough to adapt to new realities. Her trust fund would provide security without excess, education without entitlement. Grandpa, she'd said during her last visit, Mom says you've gotten mean in your old age. But you don't seem mean to me. What do I seem like to you? Like someone tired of people taking advantage of your kindness. Out of the mouths of babes. Emma possessed the emotional intelligence her mother had somehow never developed, the ability to see beyond surface explanations to the underlying truth. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Rebecca appeared in the hospice lobby at 3 p.m., looking smaller somehow than during our hospital confrontation. Simple jeans and a sweater had replaced the designer clothes. The perfect makeup was gone, revealing a woman who looked every day of her 42 years. Hello, Daddy, she said quietly from the sunroom doorway. Rebecca, this is a surprise. She entered hesitantly, as if expecting to be asked to leave. I was hoping we could talk. Really talk, without lawyers or recordings or legal documents. I gestured to the chair Maria had vacated earlier. What would you like to discuss? I've been thinking about what you said. About character and contribution and earning respect rather than inheriting it. She sat on the edge of the chair, poised for quick departure if the conversation went poorly. I think you might be right. Might be. Are you right? Definitely right. She took a shaky breath. I got a job, Daddy. Part-time at Emma's school, working in the administrative office. It's not much, but it's honest work that doesn't involve manipulating family members. I studied her face, looking for signs of performance or manipulation. Instead, I saw exhaustion, humility, and something that might have been genuine remorse. How is Marcus handling the changes? Marcus and I are separated. Have been for 2 months now. Turns out our marriage was built more on financial expectations than emotional connection. She twisted her wedding ring, still wearing it, but loosely. He's moved back with his parents while he tries to rebuild his practice. And you? I'm living in the small apartment above Mrs. Chen's garage. It's about 600 square feet, which is roughly the size of my old walk-in closet. She attempted a smile that was more of a grimace. But the rent is $800 a month, which I can afford on my salary if I'm careful with expenses. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of the pride I'd once taken in Rebecca's accomplishments. Not because she was succeeding, but because she was finally trying to achieve through her own efforts. Emma is adjusting to the new arrangements. Better than I expected. She spends weekdays with me and weekends with Marcus's parents. She says it's nice to have multiple places that feel like home rather than one place that feels like a business. We talk for another hour about practical things, Emma's grades, Rebecca's work schedule, the reality of living within limited means. Nothing about inheritance, trust funds, or legal challenges. Just the everyday conversation of a father and daughter navigating changed circumstances. As she prepared to leave, Rebecca paused at the sunroom door. "Daddy, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but do you think there's any possibility of forgiveness? Not now, maybe, but someday." I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness wasn't the same as restoration. Forgiveness didn't require returning to previous patterns or ignoring demonstrated character. Forgiveness was possible even when trust wasn't. Forgiveness is a process, sweetheart. It requires acknowledgement of wrong, genuine remorse, and changed behavior over time. Today feels like the beginning of that process. She nodded, tears bright in her eyes. "Thank you for not giving up on me completely. I gave up on who you were becoming. I never gave up on who you might become." After she left, I returned to my reports from the Harrison Foundation. The scholarship program had a waiting list of over 200 qualified applicants. The housing initiative had inquiries from 6 other states interested in replicating the model. The educational programs were producing graduates who immediately began contributing to their communities. This was the legacy I'd wanted to build, not wealth for consumption, but resources for contribution. Not entitlement for family, but opportunity for everyone. Not inheritance that corrupted character, but investment that developed it. 3 years later, the Harrison Foundation's 3rd annual gala buzzed with conversation and the clink of champagne glasses in the downtown ballroom. From my wheelchair near the stage, I watched 300 guests celebrate what had become the state's most successful affordable housing initiative. I'd outlived Dr. Martinez's predictions by 2.5 years, long enough to see my real legacy take root and flourish. The foundation had built 147 housing units, provided 89 educational scholarships, and created job training programs that had placed over 200 people in meaningful employment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jenny Martinez announced from the podium, "please welcome our founder, Robert Harrison." The applause was warm and genuine as my wheelchair was pushed to the center stage. Looking out at the crowd, I saw faces that told stories of transformation. Former scholarship recipients now working as engineers and teachers, families who'd moved from shelters into foundation housing, community leaders who'd partnered with our initiatives. 3 years ago, I began, my voice amplified by the microphone but weakened by time. I learned that the most important legacy we can leave isn't money, it's values. Not inheritance, but inspiration. Not what we give to our children, but what we teach them to give to others. In the 3rd row, I spotted a familiar face. Rebecca sat with Emma, both of them dressed appropriately for the occasion. Rebecca had been promoted to assistant principal at Emma's school, earned her master's degree through night classes, and had become a respected voice in educational circles. We'd never fully restored our relationship. Some trust, once broken, couldn't be completely repaired. But we'd found something better. Mutual respect based on who she'd chosen to become rather than who she'd been. The Harrison Foundation exists because I discovered that blood doesn't make family, character does. That wealth without purpose is poverty with money. And that the greatest gift we can give the next generation is not everything they want, but the tools to earn everything they need. As I concluded my remarks, the standing ovation felt different from the polite applause that had greeted my arrival. This was recognition not for what I'd accumulated, but for what I'd chosen to share. After the gala, Emma approached my wheelchair with the confident stride of a 17-year-old who'd learned early that respect was earned, not inherited. "Grandpa, I wanted you to know, I got accepted to State University's engineering program, with academic merit scholarships that don't have your name on them." Pride swelled in my chest like a physical warmth. "Congratulations, sweetheart. Your grandmother Martha would be so proud." "I'm going to design affordable housing," Emma continued. "Maybe work for the foundation someday. If I prove I'm qualified, you'll have to earn that position like everyone else." I wouldn't want it any other way. Rebecca joined us, her hand resting gently on Emma's shoulder. "Thank you, Daddy, for everything, especially for loving us enough to teach us how to stand on our own." As the evening wound down and guests began departing, I remained in the ballroom watching the cleanup crew restore order to the celebration's aftermath. In a few hours, this space would return to its normal function. Still, the foundation's work would continue tomorrow and for generations to come. At 74, dying slowly but surrounded by the fruits of better choices, I felt something I'd never expected to experience. Complete peace with the legacy I was leaving behind. Some stories end with reconciliation. Others end with justice. The best ones, I'd learned, end with growth, the kind that continues long after the storyteller is gone. If you found this story meaningful, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if you discovered your family valued your money more than your life? Click the video to the right to hear another powerful family story. And remember, the most significant inheritance we can leave isn't what's in our bank accounts, but what's in our character. Thank you for listening.